So I'm here at ASIM 19 with Clare Skinner and Charlotte Durand, who were two signatories to perhaps it's very topical at least, controversial letter that came out today in the MJA about gender equity in medicine. So could you guys give me a bit of the backstory as to what it was all about and how you got involved?
Yeah, well, a couple of months ago, the MJA decided that they would run a special edition about gender equity issues. And they asked for articles with the question, is there gender equity in medicine and medical leadership in Australia? And to me and a group of my Twitter friends, the answer was obvious, which is no. So the question actually seemed silly. And so a group of us got together, Jill Tomlinson posted it on Twitter, and we decided that the best response would be to submit a two-letter article, simply saying no.
And no.
So we tried to gather as many co-authors as possible to this article, and we submitted it, but the MJA rejected it. So what we've done instead is got together and compiled a letter to the MJA explaining why we wanted to point out that there is no gender equity in medicine in Australia. And sort of went from there.
So what is the status of play for gender equity in medicine here?
Women are grossly underrepresented in medical leadership positions. We've been in a position for many years where women almost outnumber men through medical schools. So my year at Sydney University in 1998, I believe, was the first in Australia where women outnumbered men. Not by much, I think by one. But we're not seeing that trickle through to people in fellowship positions, let alone heads of department, on the boards, heads of colleges, AMA presidencies, etc.
So why is that? Why do you think?
I think it's because we believe in the faulty notion of the pipeline, that if you just wait long enough it will happen, and we don't recognise the structural barriers to women fully participating in senior levels in medicine in Australia.
And so what are some of those structural barriers?
I think the obvious one is family caring responsibilities, that there's a notion that women are childbearers. The amount of pressure put on me as a mother to participate in voluntary school activities is immense. Every single time I thought about applying for a position, I was asked, do you think you're senior enough? Or have you got enough time with the kids? I'm constantly asked, where are your kids? I think there's just a massive cultural bias. And do you know what? We're doing better than some other industries, and I want to acknowledge our privilege, but I think we could do a lot better because our patients need us to do better.
And why?
There's evidence that diverse professions do better for their clients. So diverse boards make better decisions, diverse professionals make better decisions because they reflect the population in which they work.
So the issue really was you didn't like the question. So what are some of the questions we should be asking?
So as you said, we didn't like is there a gender equity in Australia in medicine? Because we thought that there's a lot of other things that we could be doing with that energy that it takes to answer that question. And those kind of things are particularly a few things that came out of the AMA's Gender Equity Summit, which includes reducing the barriers to achieving gender equity within medicine, things like equality of parental leave for both parents, all parents who are caring for children, the portability of parental leave in between states when you're moving, things like improving diversity targets and transparency on leadership selection into training programs, those kind of things. We need to address the barriers to achieving gender equity rather than still trying to argue over if it's a problem or not.
Yes. It's really hard to buck the cultural norm. Sometimes when a norm exists, you actually have to proactively dismantle it. You can't expect it will just naturally do it by itself. So for me, the better question would have been, what are you doing about gender equity in your profession? Or what are we doing about gender equity in medicine in Australia? Not, is there gender equity?
No, it's kind of variable, between the specialties in medicine itself. So what's the status of play in emergency medicine at the moment? I'm
actually really proud of the work that ASIM's done in this space. So I'm on the executive of the Advancing Women in Emergency section, where it's a slow burn, but we're looking at things like gender reporting. We've done a whole bunch of work trying to get women on the board at ASIM this year, and we've been successful. So we now have 3 women on the ASIM board, which is a hell of a lot better than the 0 we had in the middle of the year. And we're writing a gender equity statement for the college. We're looking at parenting and breastfeeding policies. There's a whole bunch of stuff we're doing. And I don't want to equate women's issues with parenting, because the reality here is we need to start looking at some of the Annabelle Crabb stuff, which is men are very left out of the caring space as well. And a lot of them want to be involved in caring as well.
It's about structural issues, as you say.
It's about structural issues, and it's also about dropping the notion of merit. That if merit means just tapping someone you already know on the shoulder, that's not merit at all. There's a whole bunch of talent we're missing out on which we could tap to make our specialty better.
So RANZCOG's recently been tackling this question, and they didn't go so far as to introduce quotas, but they did introduce or say they were going to introduce targets. So what's happening in that sort of an area? Is that something that the college is considering?
That's been a debate inside ASIM as well. So obviously ASIM, there was a claim of racism and discrimination against the college in 2016, and ASIM's been working through that. So there's been a lot of soul searching and internal work. And part of that was a recommendation of a 40% target for the board and all leadership entities within ASIM, and mechanisms to try and help that. Whilst the target's never been announced, it does sit there in the paperwork. And I genuinely think that quotas are a better mechanism, but we haven't. It's still getting talked about because these colleges are old and things work slowly, and this has changed.
Yeah, look, I wanted to ask your perspective on this. What is it about medicine that is holding it back, compared with some other professions?
That's tough. I mean, I think, the issue that we sort of, from a junior perspective, are seeing maybe change a little bit with the current sort of generation of trainees, registrars, residents, that kind of thing, is maybe a bit of an increase in awareness about the need for diversity, whether that be diversity of thought, diversity of background, diversity of, experience in life, and whether it be, the traditional kinds of diversity that was spoken about. I think in medicine it's maybe historically had a problem with that, and for us coming through now, that changing things up, I think, is a promising way that things are going in terms of...
So I actually think your question relates to all of the very established conservative professions, Amy, and part of the issue is we work on an apprenticeship model, and I believe in the notion of the dream son, that someone often will select for the position their dream son. And if you don't look like the dream son, and you don't sound like the dream son, and you don't play the sports of the dream son, then it's probably not deliberate that someone overlooks you, but they don't think to go looking beyond that. And I think in anything that's hierarchical, and particularly in medicine where we rely on the people who are our managers to also educate us and to employ us, give us performance reviews, you're really, really stuck. It's really, really hard to call it out. So it takes a little bit longer than it does in more agile industries.
So how do you tackle those sorts of problems?
I think I'm really impressed by the women I'm seeing speaking out. I think now we've got a good body of women who are in leadership roles in the colleges and in the representative organisations. And I think we're getting there slowly, but you have to start calling it out. But you also have to do it in a way that forms allies and makes relationships and forms partnerships. And that can be a little bit challenging when you're feeling angry and upset on the inside. But that's the way you make change.
Yeah, and speaking of allyships, I think, like you mentioned before, sometimes the whole issue about equity can end up being an us versus them, or it's not just a women's issue. Equity is across all kinds of differences and involves men just as much as women in terms of things like parental leave that we've spoken about.
Yeah, I've surprisingly found myself the parent of both a boy and a girl, which has been interesting for me because I come from an all-girls family, and I genuinely do believe that the world we're in now, that is the feminist world, the humanist world, is actually genuinely better for both of my children, because they can both express themselves the way they want, hopefully, and that's better for everybody, isn't it? Because being your authentic self is a good place to come from. You're happier and you make better decisions, and you're a more functioning and contributing human being.
That's a lovely note to finish on, I think.